Have you ever been judged the second you walk into a room? Judged for the color of your skin, the clothes you wear, or the way you carry yourself? For 17-year-old Maya, that judgment came at 35,000 feet from a woman with a badge of authority on her uniform. A woman who decided Maya didn't belong. This flight attendant made a call that would humiliate a young girl in front of an entire plane, summoning the police to drag her off like a criminal. But she made one catastrophic mistake. She had no idea who she was messing with, and no clue that the man who signed her paycheck was about to walk down that jet bridge to meet his daughter. The first-class cabin of Wing Airline's Flight 217 from JFK to LAX was an oasis of beige leather and polished chrome, a hushed world designed to insulate its occupants from the chaos of modern travel. For 17-year-old Maya Harrington, it was simply the way she traveled. She settled into seat 2B, her worn copy of The Parable of the Sower in one hand, and her noise-cancelling headphones in the other. She was dressed in a comfortable but stylish grey sweatsuit from a brand that whispered expense rather than shouted it, her hair styled in immaculate box braids that cascaded over her shoulders. She was flying home to Los Angeles after a week-long debate camp at Columbia University, her mind still buzzing with arguments about socio-economic theory. Her quiet preparations were interrupted by a clipped saccharine voice. "Can I see your boarding pass again, please?" Maya looked up into the face of a flight attendant who appeared to be chiseled from ice. Her name tag read Karen. She was a woman in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob and eyes the color of a winter sky. There was no warmth in them, only a scrutinizing intensity. "Of course," Maya said, her voice even and polite. She pulled up the digital pass on her phone and held it out. Karen Miller took an exaggerated second to study it. Her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line. She wasn't just checking the seat number. She was cross-referencing the name Maya Harrington with the young black woman sitting in front of her, and her expression made it clear the two didn't reconcile in her mind. "I see." Karen said the two words heavy with insinuation. "Would you like a pre-departure beverage? We have orange juice or sparkling water." Her tone was technically correct, but it was devoid of the welcoming warmth she had lavished on the middle-aged white man in 2A David Chen just moments before. "Water would be great, thank you," Maya replied, refusing to let the woman's coldness chip away at her composure. Her father had always taught her in a world that wants to see you as angry paws is your shield and your sword. Karen returned with the water, placing it on the small coaster with a little too much force, causing a few drops to slosh over the rim. She didn't apologize. Instead, she moved on her smile, instantly reappearing for the next passenger. Maya exchanged a brief, knowing glance with David Chen in the adjacent seat. He was a tech investor in his early 50s, and he'd seen the whole exchange. He gave her a small, sympathetic shrug as if to say, "I see it, and it's not okay." Maya appreciated the silent acknowledgement. It made her feel a little less alone. The flight took off smoothly, and for the first hour, things were blessedly uneventful. Maya lost herself in her book, the drone of the engines, a comforting hum. The meal service began, and Karen rolled the cart down the aisle. When she reached Maya's row, she listed the options. "We have the pan-seared salmon with asparagus, or a grilled chicken Caesar salad." "The salmon sounds lovely, thank you," Maya said. Karen's eyes flickered, with something that looked like annoyance. "That's a very popular option," she stated, as if Maya had no right to it. "Let me see if we have any left." She made a show of checking her manifest sighing dramatically before disappearing into the galley. She returned a minute later. "We only have one salmon left, and the passenger in 3A pre-ordered it. You'll have to have the salad." There was a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Maya, who had flown this route dozens of times, knew that pre-ordering meals in domestic first class wasn't a standard Aura Wing policy. It was a lie, and a lazy one at that. But a fight over fish wasn't worth the energy. "The salad is fine, thank you," Maya said, her voice still a model of grace. But David Chen, having overheard, leaned across the aisle. "Excuse me," he said to Karen, his voice polite but firm. "I was going to have the salmon, but I've changed my mind. Please give mine to the young lady. I'll have the salad." Karen's face tightened. She had been publicly, if gently, called out. "That won't be necessary, sir," she snapped. "I can find another one. It's no trouble at all," David insisted, smiling at Maya. "Enjoy." Defeated Karen practically threw the salmon plate onto Maya's tray table before serving David the salad with a venomous glare. The mask of customer service was gone, replaced by undisguised hostility. For the rest of the meal service, Karen ignored Maya, completely refusing to clear her tray or offer a refill on her water, while pointedly fawning over every other passenger in the cabin. Maya felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. It was the feeling she got whenever she was in a situation like this, a feeling that she was a problem, an inconvenience, a disruption to someone else's comfortable world just by existing. She tried to focus on her book, but the words swam before her eyes. The air in the gilded cage of first class suddenly felt thin and suffocating. She could feel Karen's eyes on her from the galley, watching, waiting for what for her to make one wrong move. One slip-up that would justify the prejudice already swirling in the flight attendant's mind. And Maya had a terrifying premonition that Karen would get her wish. The next few hours passed in a tense quiet. Maya did everything she could to become invisible. She didn't ask for a blanket, she didn't get up to use the lavatory, she didn't press the call button. She just sat, a statue of perfect behavior, while the tension coiled ever tighter. The inciting incident, when it came, was laughably small. While shifting in her seat to find a more comfortable position, her elbow nudged the half-empty water glass she'd been nursing for 2 hours. It tipped, spilling a small puddle of water onto the linen placemat on her tray table. It didn't go on the seat, the floor, or her clothes, just the placemat. Mortified, Maya quickly grabbed a napkin and began to dab at the spill. Before she could even get it under control, Karen was there, materializing, as if summoned by the tiny mishap. "What is going on here?" Karen demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory, loud enough to turn heads. "I'm so sorry, I just knocked my water," Maya explained, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "It's just on the mat." "Just on the mat," Karen scoffed, snatching the damp placemat from the tray. "You need to be more careful. This is a first-class cabin, not a school cafeteria." The condescension was thick and suffocating. David Chen looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowed in concern. "It was just an accident," he interjected quietly. "It could have happened to anyone." Karen shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Sir, with all due respect, I am handling this." She turned her venom back to Maya. "I've been watching you since we boarded. You've had an attitude problem from the start." Maya was stunned into silence. An attitude problem, she had been nothing but meticulously polite. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "I haven't done anything." "Oh, I think you do." Karen sneered, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more menacing. "You think because you're sitting up here, the rules don't apply to you. You're being disruptive and creating a disturbance." This was a complete fabrication, a wild escalation from a spilled glass of water. Maya's training, her father's voice in her head, kicked in. Stay calm. De-escalate. Do not give them the reaction they want. "Ma'am, I assure you, I'm not trying to cause a problem," Maya said, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to control it. I just want to get home. There seems to be a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is that you think you can speak to me this way." Karen retorted, her reality twisting to fit her narrative. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was a beleaguered authority figure, handling an unruly passenger. "I am the purser on this flight. My primary responsibility is the safety and security of everyone on board. Your belligerent behavior is a security concern." The words belligerent and security concern hung in the air like poison. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew this script. She had seen it play out in countless viral videos. A black person existing in a space where they were not expected, and a white person in a position of minor power, using the language of threat and security to justify their prejudice. "This is ridiculous," David Chen said, finally having enough. He closed his laptop with a sharp snap. "This young woman has been perfectly behaved. You, on the other hand, have been hostile to her since she boarded. I'm a witness to this entire thing." Karen's face went pale with fury. Being challenged by a man who fit her profile of a valued customer was something she hadn't anticipated. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. "So you don't know the whole story?" she hissed. "I'm going to have to ask you to remain in your seat and not interfere with the crew. As for you," she said, pointing a trembling finger at Maya, "I am giving you one final warning. You will remain silent for the rest of this flight. One more word, and I will inform the captain and have you restrained." The threat was so disproportionate, so unhinged, that it left Maya breathless. Restrained for spilling water. It was a fantasy of power, and Maya was its unwilling participant. She simply nodded, a knot of pure cold fear forming in her stomach. She could feel the stares of the other passengers, some curious, some sympathetic, some suspicious. In their eyes, she was no longer just a teenage girl. She was an unknown, a potential threat, a problem defined by the hysterical accusations of the woman in uniform. Karen gave a satisfied sniff, her authority asserted. She turned and marched back to the galley, where she immediately picked up the in-flight phone to the cockpit. Maya couldn't hear the words, but she could see the animated gestures, the self-righteous indignation. She was reporting it. She was creating an official record of Maya's disruptive behavior. The lie was now being entered into a log, given the weight of a formal complaint. Maya leaned her head against the cool plastic of the window, watching the endless blue sky outside. She felt trapped not just in the metal tube hurtling through the air, but in a narrative she had no power to escape. The plane began its initial descent into Los Angeles, and the dread in Maya's heart grew heavier. This wasn't over. Karen had lit a fuse, and Maya had a sickening feeling that she was about to witness the explosion. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed on, and the plane began its final approach into LAX. The mood in the first-class cabin was thick with unspoken tension. Karen Miller patrolled the aisle with a grim sense of purpose, avoiding eye contact with Maya, but making her presence felt. Maya just stared out the window, watching the sprawling geometry of Los Angeles grow closer, wishing she could just teleport home. The landing was smooth. As the plane taxied towards the terminal, the usual cheerful chatter of passengers preparing to deplane was absent. Instead, there was a heavy silence. Maya's phone vibrated with a text from her driver. Landed, I'm at the arrivals curb. She typed a quick reply. Almost? Might be a slight delay. A massive understatement. The plane came to a final stop at Gate 54B. The jet bridge, a covered umbilical cord, trundled into place and docked with the aircraft door. The engines whined down, but the familiar thump hiss of the door being disarmed and opened didn't come. Instead, the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional, but with an undercurrent of official severity. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We are dealing with a minor security issue on board. Port Authority will be boarding the aircraft momentarily. Please remain seated until we have been cleared. A ripple of nervous murmuring went through the plane. Security issue. Port Authority, Maya's blood ran cold. She knew this was about her. Karen stood near the cockpit door, arms crossed, face set like granite. She was a picture of smug vindication. A moment later, the cabin door was opened from the outside. 2 uniformed LAX police officers stepped on board. The first was a tall, stern-faced man in his 40s, Officer Reynolds. The second, Officer Davies, was younger, with a more cautious expression. Purser. Officer Reynolds asked, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. "That's me," Karen said, stepping forward. "Thank you for coming so quickly, officers. The unruly passenger is in seat 2B. She pointed directly at Maya, her finger an accusing spear. "She's been aggressive and non-compliant for the entire flight. I was concerned for the safety of the crew and other passengers." Every head in the front half of the plane swiveled to stare at Maya. The heat of their gazes felt like a physical blow. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. She was a spectacle. A black girl in first class, now officially branded as the unruly passenger. The stereotype she fought so hard to defy had been forced upon her like a straitjacket. Officer Reynolds and Officer Davies walked down the narrow aisle, their boots heavy on the cabin floor. They stopped beside her seat. "Ma'am?" Officer Reynolds said, his voice neutral but firm. "My name is Officer Reynolds. We've received a report of a disturbance. We're going to need you to gather your personal belongings and come with us." Maya looked from his impassive face to Karen's triumphant one. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She's lying. I just spilled some water." "That's not what the flight's purser reported, ma'am," Officer Davies said. "We can sort this all out on the jet bridge. Please, let's not make a scene." The irony of his words was crushing. They were the ones making the scene. "I can vouch for her," David Chen said, standing up. "Officers, I'm in 2A. I saw the whole thing. The flight attendant has been antagonizing this young woman for 5 hours. This is a gross abuse of her authority." Officer Reynolds held up a hand. "Sir, we appreciate your statement, and we'll take it down. But for now, we need the passenger in question to deplane. Please stay out of it." David looked at Maya, his expression a mixture of anger and helplessness. He sat back down, but kept his eyes fixed on the officers, a silent, disapproving witness. With trembling hands, Maya gathered her book and her phone. She stuffed her headphones into a carry-on bag. As she stood, she felt dizzy, disoriented. The eyes of everyone on the plane followed her every move. She walked the longest 10 feet of her life down the aisle and past Karen, who refused to even look at her. As she stepped out of the aircraft and onto the jet bridge, the sterile, air-conditioned world of the plane was replaced by the stale industrial air of the terminal. The 2 officers stood on either side of her. The door to the plane was pulled shut behind them, leaving them in the windowless tunnel. "Okay," Officer Reynolds said, pulling out a small notepad. "Let's start with your name." "Maya Harrington," she said, her voice shaking. "And your date of birth." She gave it to him. He jotted it down. "Now tell us your side of what happened on the flight." Tears she had been holding back finally began to well in her eyes. It was all too much, the judgment, the escalation, the public shaming. She felt small and powerless. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady herself. She needed to be smart. She needed her dad. "Before I say anything else," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its former strength, "I need to make a phone call. Officer Davies looked at his partner, who gave a slight nod. "You can make one call." Reynolds allowed. Maya unlocked her phone, her thumb hovering over the contact labeled Dad. She pressed call. It rang once, twice. He picked up. "Hey, sweetie." His warm, familiar voice came through the speaker. "Just landed myself. I'm heading over from the private terminal now. Be at the curb in 10. How was the debate camp?" Tears streamed down her face, now silent and hot. She choked back a sob. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of her ordeal. "It happened again, but it's worse this time. They called the police." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. The cheerful warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by an instant, terrifying cold. "Where are you, Maya? Tell me exactly where you are." "On the jet bridge, gate 54B, Aura Wing Flight 217. "Stay right there," he commanded, his voice now dangerously calm. "Don't say another word to anyone. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Maya lowered the phone, a small piece of her father's strength flowing back into her. The officers watched her, their expressions unreadable. Back inside the plane, Karen Miller was probably celebrating her victory. She had successfully identified a threat, neutralized it, and protected her cabin. She had done her job, but she had no idea that the storm she had so eagerly created was about to turn back on her with the force of a hurricane. Inside Flight 217, an uneasy quiet had settled. The passengers were restless, whispering among themselves, eager to get off. Karen Miller, however, was in her element. She was briefing the two other flight attendants in the forward galley, her voice low and self-important. "You see, you have to be proactive," she instructed, fluffing her hair. "The second you feel a situation might escalate, you document and you report. The captain backed me 100%. That girl was looking for trouble from the moment she boarded. Some people just try to game the system to get a payout." The junior flight attendant, a young woman named Chloe, looked uncomfortable. "She just seemed like a kid to me," she murmured. "Spilling water. It's never just anything, Chloe," Karen snapped. "It starts with disrespect, then non-compliance. You have to know the signs. I protected this flight." She basked in the glow of her perceived competence, a modern-day hero of the skies. Her moment of glory was interrupted by a frantic banging on the outside of the cabin door, followed by the voice of the gate agent, strained and panicked. "Open the door. You need to open the door now." The flight attendants exchanged confused glances. Karen, annoyed at the interruption, moved to the door and peered through the peephole. Her eyes widened. She fumbled with the heavy latch and pulled the door inward. The gate agent, a man named Marcus, stumbled in his face, pale and beaded with sweat. "What is going on here? Why are there cops on my jet bridge?" he demanded. Before Karen could answer, a figure strode past him, moving with such speed and purpose that he seemed to create his own gravitational pull. He was a man in his late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a bespoke navy suit that fit him like a second skin. He was impeccably groomed from his salt-and-pepper hair to his polished Oxford shoes, but it was his face that commanded the room. His features were set in a mask of cold, controlled fury. His dark eyes swept the cabin, missing nothing. This was a man accustomed to absolute authority. This was James Harrington, the founder-chairman and chief executive officer of Aura Wing Airlines. The flight attendants froze. They had seen his picture 1,000 times in corporate newsletters and training videos. Seeing him in person on their plane unannounced was like a deity descending from the heavens. James's eyes landed on Karen's purser name tag. He strode directly toward her, his presence sucking all the air out of the galley. The passengers in the first few rows fell silent, sensing a seismic shift in power. "You, James Harrington," said his voice, not loud, but low and resonant, with a chilling intensity that was far more terrifying than any shout. "You are the purser on this flight." Karen, flustered and starstruck, tried to paste on her professional smile. "Mr. Harrington. Sir, what a surprise. Yes, I'm Karen Miller. Is there a problem?" James Harrington leaned in, closer, his eyes like chips of obsidian. "A problem. Yes, you could say we have a problem." His voice dropped to a near whisper, yet every person in the first-class cabin could hear it. "Tell me, Miss Miller, what have you done to my daughter?" The words detonated in the silent cabin. Daughter. My daughter. Karen's smile evaporated. The blood drained from her face, leaving her with a sickly, mottled complexion. Her mind raced, trying to process the impossible. The girl in 2B, the unruly passenger. Harrington. It couldn't be. Chloe, the junior flight attendant, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Maya Harrington. James Harrington. I don't understand, sir." Karen stammered, her body beginning to tremble. "Oh, I think you do," James said, his voice laced with ice. He turned his head slightly. "Marcus, get the captain out here, now, and get me the contact information for every single passenger in this cabin. Nobody deplanes until I say so." He then turned and strode out onto the jet bridge without another word to Karen. He saw his daughter, her face streaked with tears, standing between two police officers. The sight seemed to break through his cold fury, and for a second a look of pure fatherly pain crossed his face. "Maya," he said, his voice suddenly gentle. He walked to her and enveloped her in a hug, his large frame shielding her from the world. "It's okay, baby. I'm here now. It's over." He held her for a long moment before turning to the two officers. They had watched his arrival, their expressions shifting from procedural authority to wary confusion. "Officers," James said, his voice back to its commanding tone. "I am James Harrington, CEO of this airline. This is my 17-year-old daughter. The purser of this flight, Karen Miller, has filed a complaint against her. A complaint that, from what my daughter has told me, is a complete fabrication born of racial prejudice. Aura Wing will be conducting a full and immediate internal investigation. We will, of course, cooperate fully with any official inquiry you need to make, and we will provide you with unedited witness statements from every passenger and crew member, as well as the CVR and any other data from this flight. For now, however, I am taking my daughter home." Officer Reynolds, a veteran cop who knew a watershed moment when he saw one, simply nodded. "Understood, sir. We'll need to file a report based on the purser's initial call, but given the circumstances..." He trailed off. There was nothing more to be done here. The power dynamic had been irrevocably altered. "I understand you have a job to do, officer," James said, giving a curt nod. "Send the report to my office. We'll handle it from here." He put a protective arm around Maya's shoulders and began to lead her toward the terminal. As they walked away, Maya glanced back over her shoulder. She saw Karen Miller standing in the doorway of the plane, her face a mask of utter horror and disbelief. She looked like a woman who had just realized she hadn't just made a mistake. She had detonated her entire life. James Harrington led Maya away from the gate and toward a private lounge, his arm a shield around her. He didn't speak until they were safely inside a quiet VIP room, the door closing with a soft click, shutting out the rest of the world. Only then did he turn to her, his face softening with a father's concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Tell me everything." And so she did. Through renewed tears, Maya recounted the entire flight, from the first condescending request for her boarding pass to the fabricated story about the last salmon dish, the public scolding over the spilled water, and the final terrifying threat of being restrained. She told him about Karen's sneering looks and hostile tone, and about the quiet support from the man in 2A. James listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with every word. The controlled anger he had shown on the jet bridge was nothing compared to the glacial rage that now settled deep in his eyes. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I am so sorry, Maya," he said, finally, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry this happened. I'm sorry that the very organization I built to connect people has people within it who would treat you this way, who would treat anyone this way. This isn't just a customer service issue. This is a rot, and I'm going to cut it out." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Sarah, it's James. I'm invoking Protocol 0, Flight 213, from JFK. I want you at LAX in 1 hour. Bring your top team. No, I don't care what you have to cancel. The head of flight operations, the head of HR and corporate counsel, all of them. Get them on a charter if you have to. And get me Karen Miller's entire service record on my desk in the next 10 minutes. Every commendation, every complaint. I want to know how many times she's sneezed in the last 20 years. He ended the call and turned back to Maya. Protocol 0 is something I created for catastrophic failures. We've only used it twice before, once for a gear-up landing and once for a major data breach. This to me is just as serious. Meanwhile, back on Flight 217, chaos had been replaced by a stunned, formal paralysis. The passengers were still not allowed to deplane. The captain, a seasoned pilot named Frank Gideon, was now standing in the galley with Karen. He had been briefed by James and was white as a sheet. "What were you thinking, Karen?" Frank asked, his voice a low, furious rumble. "Calling the police on a passenger for spilling water on James Harrington's daughter. I didn't know who she was." Karen protested, her voice shrill with panic. She was being difficult, non-compliant. "I followed procedure." "You didn't follow procedure, you followed your prejudice," Frank shot back. "I've flown with you for 12 years, Karen. I've seen how you get. I've heard the little comments you make in the galley. I always let it slide, told myself it was just you being you. But this, you've brought ruin on yourself, and you've shamed this entire crew." Just then, an executive from Aura Wing's ground operations team boarded the plane. He walked straight to Karen. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "Mr. Harrington has instructed me to inform you that you are suspended effective immediately. Your flight credentials and airport ID are to be surrendered. You will be escorted from the airport by security. You are not to contact any Aura Wing employees. You will be notified of the time and place for your formal interview with our internal affairs and legal departments." Each sentence was a hammer blow. Karen stared at him speechless. Escorted out like a criminal. "But my bag, my things," she stammered. "They will be collected and sent to you," the executive said dismissively. 2 airport security guards appeared behind him. They were not police officers. They were the airport's private security, but their presence was no less intimidating. Karen looked around desperately, her eyes pleading with her fellow crew members. Chloe wouldn't meet her gaze. The other flight attendant looked at the floor. Captain Gideon just shook his head slowly. She was completely, utterly alone. As the security guards led a now sobbing Karen Miller down the jet bridge, David Chen, still in seat 2A, watched them go. The ground operations executive approached him next. "Mr. Chen," he asked politely. "My name is Robert Ames. Mr. Harrington sends his personal regards and asked me to get your contact information. Our head of internal investigations, Ms. Sarah Jenkins, would very much like to speak with you about what you witnessed on today's flight. I will tell her everything, David said, his voice firm. And you can tell Mr. Harrington that his daughter showed more grace and composure under pressure than most adults I know. What happened to her was an absolute disgrace. Finally, the remaining passengers were allowed to deplane. They filed out silently, many of them casting glances at the empty seat in 2B, now the center of a corporate firestorm. The story of what happened on Flight 217 was already beginning to spread, whispered from passenger to passenger, from ground crew to terminal staff. The reckoning had begun. For Karen Miller, the freefall was just starting. For Aura Wing Airlines, it was a moment of painful, necessary self-examination. And for James Harrington, it was a brutal reminder that for all his success, he couldn't build a corporate wall high enough to protect his own child from the ugliness of the world. But he could, and he would make sure the person who brought that ugliness to his daughter's doorstep would face a full and unsparing accounting. The investigation, led by the formidable Sarah Jenkins, Aura Wing's Vice President of Internal Affairs, was swift and mercilessly efficient. Sarah was a former federal prosecutor who ran her department with the precision of a surgical strike. She assembled her team at an LAX conference room within 2 hours of James Harrington's call. The first file on her tablet was Karen Miller's 22-year service record. On the surface, it was exemplary. Multiple commendations for customer service, glowing annual reviews from her direct supervisors, not a single formal demerit. But Sarah knew the devil was in the details, specifically in the informal passenger feedback logs, the digital equivalent of a suggestion box that rarely saw the light of day. Her team's data analysts went to work cross-referencing every flight Karen had worked for the past 5 years with any negative feedback, no matter how minor. A pattern began to emerge. It was subtle, but undeniable. There was a complaint from a doctor. Adebayo, a Nigerian surgeon who claimed a purser on his flight to London, lost his pre-ordered vegetarian meal and was uniquely unhelpful. The purser was Karen Miller. There was feedback from a Hispanic family flying to Cancun who felt they were rudely policed about their children's volume, while other families were not. The purser was Karen Miller. A young Asian-American musician noted a flight attendant was dismissive and condescending when he asked for help storing his cello. The flight attendant was Karen Miller. Individually, these were minor grievances, easily dismissed as subjective he said, she said encounters. But taken together, they painted a portrait of an employee who consistently reserved her hostility for passengers of color. She was smart enough to never use slurs or overt language, operating instead in the gray area of microaggressions, poor service, and weaponized incompetence. Maya Harrington wasn't an anomaly. She was just the first victim who had a direct line to the CEO. The next piece of evidence was David Chen's formal testimony. He spent 90 minutes on a video call with Sarah Jenkins, calmly and chronologically detailing Karen's behavior from the moment Maya boarded. His credibility was unimpeachable. He was a neutral third party, a frequent top-tier flyer, and a respected figure in the business community. His account corroborated Maya's story perfectly. It was a masterclass in passive aggression, David concluded. She was clearly trying to provoke a reaction from the young woman. When she didn't get one, she simply invented a narrative of belligerence to justify her prejudice. I've never seen anything like it. Finally, it was Corin's turn. Accompanied by a union representative, she sat across from Sarah Jenkins and 2 of Aura Wing's top corporate lawyers. If Karen had shown a shred of remorse, if she had admitted to a lapse in judgment, there might have been a path to a quiet resignation. She did the opposite. She doubled down, painting herself as the victim of a vindictive, privileged teenager and her powerful father. I was following FAA regulations regarding disruptive passengers. Karen stated, her voice tight with a misplaced sense of righteousness. My job is safety. That girl had a chip on her shoulder. She was confrontational about the meal service, she was careless with airline property, and her entire demeanor was aggressive. I felt threatened. Sarah Jenkins listened patiently, her face an unreadable mask. When Karen finished her tirade, Sarah slid a tablet across the table. Ms. Miller, this is the preliminary report from our data analytics team, she said, her voice cold. It details 18 separate passenger complaints filed against you in the last 5 years. Can you explain why over 90% of those complaints came from non-white passengers? Karen glanced at the screen, her face paling. That's a coincidence. People are too sensitive these days. They play the race card. Is that what Mr. Chen was doing? Playing the race card? Sarah countered. Or Officer Reynolds of the LAX Port Authority, whose official report states that when they arrived, they found the unruly passenger to be a visibly distressed minor, and the situation to be grossly misrepresented by the purser. Karen's bravado began to crumble. He's lying. They're all siding with him because he's the CEO. They're siding with the evidence, Sarah corrected her, the final piece of which is you. You called armed police onto an aircraft to deal with a 17-year-old girl who had spilled a glass of water. You didn't follow de-escalation protocols. You didn't consult with your fellow crew members, one of whom has already given a statement that she saw no threatening behavior from Miss Harrington whatsoever. You bypassed every single step of procedure to indulge a personal prejudice. You put a minor child in a terrifying and humiliating position, and you exposed this company to catastrophic legal and reputational liability. You didn't protect your flight, Ms. Miller. You endangered it. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Karen Miller was terminated for cause effective immediately. The union, seeing the mountain of evidence against her, quietly withdrew its support. But the karma didn't stop there. News travels fast in the tight-knit aviation community. The story of the purser who called the cops on the CEO's daughter became a cautionary tale. No other major airline would touch her. She was blacklisted. Desperate, Karen tried to take her story to the media, hiring a cut-rate PR agent and claiming she was a victim of cancel culture. A few fringe blogs picked it up, but it backfired spectacularly. Aurawing, in an uncharacteristically aggressive move, released a public statement. It didn't name Karen, but it detailed the incident, announced a company-wide overhaul of its anti-bias training, and stated its zero-tolerance policy for discrimination in any form. The statement was accompanied by a glowing quote from David Chen, who praised the airline's swift and decisive action. The final crushing blow came from the Harrington family themselves. They filed a civil suit against Karen Miller personally for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Their lawyer was one of the top litigators in the country. Karen, now unemployed and unemployable, was facing financial ruin. The life she had built over 2 decades, the petty kingdom she ruled at 35,000 feet, had been utterly and completely dismantled by her own hatred. 6 months after the incident on Flight 217, the air inside an Aurawing Airlines training center near Dallas-Fort Worth was thick with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. This was the inaugural session of the Maya Initiative, a mandatory top-to-bottom overhaul of the company's employee training, and the room was filled with flight attendants, some with decades of experience, who thought they had seen it all. At the front of the room stood Dr. Alistair Finch, a renowned industrial psychologist with a specialty in diversity, equity, and inclusion. He wasn't the usual corporate trainer with slick PowerPoints and empty platitudes. He was sharp, empathetic, and disarmingly direct. Implicit bias. Dr. Finch began, his voice resonating through the room. Isn't about being a bad person. It's not about conscious hatred. It's about the shortcuts our brains create based on a lifetime of media, cultural, and social inputs. The question isn't if you have them. The question is what you do to recognize and counteract them, especially when you are in a position of authority over 300 souls in a metal tube at 35,000 feet. He clicked to the next slide, which showed a redacted, anonymized summary of the events on Flight 217. This was not a system failure, he said, his gaze sweeping across the faces in the room. This was a human failure, enabled by a system that was not equipped to check it. Our goal with this initiative is to equip you, to give you the tools to see a passenger not as a potential problem, but as a person, to understand that professionalism and empathy are not mutually exclusive. Later in the day, the session broke into smaller groups for role-playing exercises. In one group, Chloe, the junior flight attendant from Amaya's flight, found herself playing the role of the purser. A trainer playing a passenger was being difficult, demanding, a little rude, challenging her authority over a trivial matter. The old training would have guided her toward a script of asserting authority and documenting non-compliance. The Maya initiative, however, had taught her a new approach. She took a breath, centered herself, and leaned in, lowering her voice to create a private, respectful space. Sir, it sounds like you're having a frustrating day, and I'm sorry that this part of your journey isn't going smoothly. Let's figure out how we can solve this together. The change was immediate. The role-playing passenger's aggression deflated, replaced by surprise. Dr. Finch, observing from the side, gave a small approving nod. This was the change James Harrington was paying for, not a change in policy, but a change in perspective, one interaction at a time. The initiative was a colossal expense, one that had made several board members balk, but James had stood his ground. We sell seats on planes, he had told them in a tense board meeting. But our product is trust. We broke that trust. This is the price of rebuilding it. It's not an expense. It's an investment in our brand soul. The results were already beginning to show with customer satisfaction, scores among minority demographics, climbing for the first time in years. Thousands of miles away, on the sun-drenched campus of Stanford University, Maya Harrington sat at her desk, the California light streaming through her dorm room window. She was no longer just a victim of a viral story. She was its author. Her blog, which she had titled The View from 2B, had become a phenomenon. It was a space for her to process her experience, but it had grown into a community for young people of color who shared their own stories of navigating prejudiced spaces. Her latest post was her most personal yet. They tell you to be twice as good, she wrote, to be unimpeachable, to be polite, poised, and perfect, lest you confirm their lowest expectations. On Flight 217, I was all of those things. I was the perfect passenger, and it didn't matter. My perfection couldn't protect me, because in her eyes, my very presence was the imperfection. The lesson I learned wasn't that I needed to be better. The lesson was that the game was rigged. So what do? You don't just learn to play the rigged game. You expose it. You rewrite the rules. You build something better in its place. That day, a flight attendant tried to make me small, to put me in a box labeled unruly. But she failed. All she did was give me a platform, and I intend to use every inch of it. Her advocacy had given her a purpose that transcended the trauma. She was invited to speak at an aviation industry summit on the future of the passenger experience. Standing at a podium in front of hundreds of airline executives, she was no longer the terrified girl on the jet bridge. She was a confident, articulate young woman who commanded the room with her quiet strength. For too long your industry has seen customer service through a single lens," she said, her voice steady and clear. "My father is rebuilding his airline's training around empathy. I ask the rest of you to do the same. Because the next time a young person who looks like me boards one of your planes, their ability to arrive at their destination feeling safe and respected shouldn't depend on whether or not their father is the CEO." James Harrington sat in the front row, watching his daughter with tears brimming in his eyes. This was the result of everything. The horror of that day had blossomed into this incredible, powerful moment of change. He had never been prouder. Later that evening on a call, he told her, "You know, for years my goal was to build the biggest airline in the world, a legacy of steel and logistics. But now I see, you are my legacy, Maya. The change you're forcing, that's what will last. But for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. For every story of redemption, there must be a story of the fall." Karen Miller's world had not blossomed. It had collapsed into a singularity of bitterness and regret. Her lawsuit against the Harringtons was a masterclass in self-immolation. During a grueling 8-hour deposition, the Harringtons' lawyer, a famously relentless litigator named Benjamin Carter, dismantled her reality piece by piece. "Ms. Miller," Carter had asked, his voice deceptively gentle, "you testified that you felt threatened by the 17-year-old 5'5" Miss Harrington. Can you describe the specific physical action she took that made you fear for your safety?" "It was her demeanor," Karen stammered. "The aggressive way she sat there reading her book." "She read a book at you aggressively?" Carter asked, letting the absurdity of the statement hang in the air. And this aggressive reading, combined with the belligerent spilling of water, necessitated a call for armed police officers. By the end of the day, Karen was a weeping, incoherent mess, her lies exposed, as the pathetic, prejudiced fantasies they were. Her case was dismissed, and she was saddled with a mountain of legal debt. Now her life was a monotonous loop of grey. Her world was the suffocating confines of the Sunbeam Market in a forgotten Florida strip mall. Her kingdom was a squeaky-wheeled checkout counter. Her colleagues were not pilots and globe-trotting flight attendants, but bored teenagers and tired middle-aged women who smelled of cigarettes and disinfectant. Her friends from the airline had long since stopped returning her calls, distancing themselves from her toxicity and shame. One Tuesday afternoon, she sat on a cracked plastic chair in the employee break room, chewing a dry turkey sandwich. The room smelled of burnt popcorn and despair. A small grease-stained television was mounted in the corner, broadcasting a daytime talk show. Suddenly, the show cut to a commercial. It was a new ad for Aura Wing Airlines. The music was uplifting, the cinematography bright and hopeful. It featured a montage of beautiful, diverse faces, an elderly Asian couple holding hands, a black father teaching his daughter the names of the clouds, a Hispanic businesswoman working on her laptop. A new flight attendant, a warm-faced Latina woman, was shown kneeling to speak to a nervous young flyer, her expression a perfect portrait of empathy. The commercial ended with a shot of a plane soaring into a brilliant sunset, and then the tagline appeared, superimposed over the clouds, Aura Wing Airlines, where everyone belongs. Karen stared at the screen, her sandwich forgotten in her hand. Everyone, except her. This new world, this bright, inclusive and profitable new image for Aura Wing, was built directly on the ashes of her career. Her single act of spite had become the foundational story for their corporate redemption. She was the villain whose defeat signaled the dawn of a new, better era. A hot, familiar rage coiled in her stomach. It was their fault. The spoiled brat, her powerful father, The politically correct world gone mad. In her mind, she remained the victim, the righteous one who was punished for simply doing her job. She couldn't see, would never see, that the cage she now inhabited was one of her own making. The door had always been open. All she ever had to do was choose kindness. She finished her sandwich in the flickering fluorescent light, the cheerful music of the commercial echoing in the silent, lonely corners of her mind. The hard karma hadn't just taken her job, it had taken her world and rebuilt it into a paradise she was permanently exiled from, leaving her with nothing but the bitter taste of what could have been. This story is a powerful reminder that prejudice and abuse of power, no matter how small, the stage will eventually face a reckoning. Karen thought she was untouchable, protected by her uniform and her assumptions. But she forgot the most important rule of all: you never truly know who you're talking to. Maya's story shows us the power of grace under pressure, and how one family's refusal to accept injustice can trigger a wave of positive change for thousands. It's a story about consequences, but it's also a story about hope. Hope that even the most painful experiences can be transformed into a force for good. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like Tola button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. We all have a story. What's yours? Let us know in the comments below.